Well, pretty slow weekend of news, right? Yeah, no, not quite. Almost wish that it was a slow weekend. Will Wade out as LSU's head basketball coach, as we learned on Saturday, as a response to the notice of allegations that was sent to LSU. Now, what does that mean for this LSU basketball program? What does it mean for other programs that also wear the purple and gold? Where do we go from here? And how did we get here? Now, all of the reports that we've seen, it's a whirlwind of legal jargon, and there's a ton of information to break down. So we'll break that down here on the Locked On LSU podcast.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Today's episode of Locked On LSU is brought to you by RunYourPool. March Madness is here, and RunYourPool has a better way to create your bracket. RunYourPool.com, the premier sports pool hosting service. Now, I am Caroline Fenton, and I am your host. I am an LSU alum. I'm a diehard LSU fan, and I am now a sports talk radio host in Nashville, Tennessee. You can follow me on Twitter at Caroline Fenton1. I'll be posting podcast updates, sports updates, my takes, my opinions on anything happening in the sports world there. You can also follow at Locked On LSU for podcast updates. I'll tweet links to the podcast and also links to the YouTube page as well. But I mean, while you're at it, while you're clicking on a YouTube link, you might as well just subscribe to the YouTube channel, Locked On LSU, so you can be notified as soon as these podcasts drop, and you will be in the know as soon as we have these podcasts ready. Now, a lot to get into today. Big weekend in LSU sports, and things kind of went from really good to really bad really quickly. I mean, we were riding high, a win against Missouri, and LSU looked good in the SEC tournament in their first game against Missouri. Then Arkansas came around, and all of that offensive momentum that LSU had after the Missouri game, what I thought was going to set them up for success for the SEC tournament, because they had been off offensively, and what we saw against Missouri, they had a great game. They played Arkansas so well at the end of the regular season. And then the game against Arkansas, defeated by Arkansas in the SEC tournament. And then, of course, the next day we learned the news that Will Wade would be relieved of his duties, fired for cause as LSU's head basketball coach. So how did we get to this point? I mean, it's been a few years in the making. We learned about all of these accusations in 2019, things that happened in 2017. We heard the FBI wiretap, the quote-unquote strong-ass offer, Will Wade's phone call with Christian Dawkins, and then we continued to hear more and more damning information about what Will Wade was doing in the program. And LSU football is not innocent in all of this. I want to get into that coming up next. But focusing on basketball here, because it was a fairly quick response. LSU was given a notice of allegations last week from the NCAA's complex case unit of the independent accountability resolution process. Now, it's a lot of words, it's a lot of fancy words, but it's basically just the NCAA's unit that reviews things like this, that reviews recruiting violations and money violations, financial violations. This is the group that oversees how they proceed with programs that may be in violation of NCAA rules. So LSU was given that notice of allegations last week. It had some very damning evidence about Will Wade. Will Wade was fired after being charged with 5 level 1 NCAA violations in that notice of allegations. So those violations being providing payments to players, giving money to the former fiance of a player for silence and a reckless indifference for the NCAA rules. I was not aware of this until all of the notice of allegations came out, that Will Wade he did give money to a fiance of a former player. Basically, she came out and said, hey, I have people at other schools, I have people that are offering me money to spill what you are doing to this program, some of the rules that you have broken. And he basically said, okay, like what is it going to take for you to stay quiet? He wired money in 2 separate occasions. It's that. Also, the notice that allegations also cited what is most likely the most known accusation, of course, against Will Wade, the quote-unquote strong-ass offer wiretap with Christian Dawkins, the notorious paying players in college basketball guy who is currently in prison. The notice of allegations cited that violated the principles of ethical conduct and or offered impermissible recruiting inducements in the form of cash payments and job offers in order to secure. In the notice of allegations, it says an unnamed recruit. I think that we can all assume that that's most likely Javonte Smart. That was the player in question in the strong ass offer phone call. So Will Wade offering money to players, and the wiretap that is Will Wade's voice on the phone with Christian Dawkins talking about the strong ass offer to Javonte Smart, paying of the fiance. The list goes on and on of the NCAA violations against Will Wade. Now, the NCAA listed in this notice of allegations 8 level 1 violations, and they also cited, quote, a lack of institutional control. Now, that is dreaded verbiage because in the NCAA legal jargon, that's about as bad as it gets. Now, it's not a death penalty, but it could be postseason ban for a couple of years. Now, it's incredibly difficult to try and figure out exactly what the NCAA is going to value here because the NCAA is a very, very gray organization. It's not black and white. It's not, you did this, here is your punishment, or you did XYZ and you'll be punished XYZ. It's kind of like the NFL as well. They choose not to set precedent in their punishment. So it's going to be incredibly difficult to determine or try and predict what the NCAA is going to do about this. But the lack of institutional control is just about as bad as it gets for a team or an organization, a school that's facing things like this. Be is next for Will Wade? Now, the notice of allegations states that for these violations against Will Wade, the 5 level 1 violations, he could be given a show cause penalty. Now, I've done a whole lot of research into this, y'all. I've been there and done a whole lot of digging into legal jargon, but a show cause penalty per the NCAA calls that an administrative punishment ordering that any NCAA rules violations will stay in effect against that coach for a specified period of time. So basically, the NCAA is saying, hey, Will Wade, we can bar you from coaching for a specific period of time, saying, okay, Will Wade, we think that you committed 15 years worth of penalties, so you can't coach in the NCAA for 15 years, whatever it may be, whatever time period they choose. And it carries over to wherever Will Wade may want to eventually. If he does get another job within college basketball, he will be barred from coaching for any school, much less LSU. I don't think that he's going to get that privilege anytime soon. But there are two sides to this entire story. We see the Will Wade side. Of course, Will Wade losing his job on Saturday as a result of these notice of allegations. But there's another side of this, and that's the LSU football side of things. Of course, things feel most relevant for basketball because Will Wade was just fired. It is the NCAA tournament. We heard about all of these allegations during basketball season, but there is an entire side of this that is related to LSU football. And I'll get into that coming up next. But before we do that, I want to let y'all know about Run Your Pool. The March Madness is only just a few days away. So that means that you need to start thinking now about where you are going to be running your brackets this year. Are you going to go for the usual, or are you looking for the best? We've done our homework here, and we are running our brackets with RunYourPool.com. So along with standard brackets, Run Your Pool offers game types like Survivor or Pick X, and they're both really, really fun in their own way. They have options to edit scoring, and they offer more intel to make your picks, all the stuff that you're not going to find at ESPN or CBS. Plus, if you've got a business and you want to get some new customers or maybe please your current customers, get some cash flow moving in Q1, Run Your Pool can help you take some of that madness magic and play alongside your employees. Plus, they offer the full white glove customer support, custom branding, and one of the easiest 3-minute setups that you will ever find. So not only is it fun and is it different, it's super easy to use as well. Clearly, we here at Locked On believe in Run Your Pool because, like I said, we're running our brackets there ourselves. There is no truer test than that. If you want to play against us for a shot at a cash prize up to $1,800, join us at runyourpool.com/lockedon. And while you're there, create your own pool for your friends and family. Enter code PUREMADNESS at checkout for $10 off your custom pool. All the rules and details will be available there. That's runyourpool.com/lockedon for your chance to win a cash prize up to $1,800. We look forward to seeing and beating you there. March Madness is here. Now, if you're ready to get those brackets busted, we're getting into the nitty gritty. Get your brackets together. Mine's not going to be so great because every year it's busted in the first or second round, but it's all for the fun of it. And if you haven't checked out this new platform to make your bracket, you got to check out Stat Hero. Stat Hero's NCAA single game pick'ems pit the star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. Take control back from those handicappers that always seem to have the advantage. They always seem to know something that you don't, and it's really frustrating. But start focusing on the players you know best with a gameplay that doesn't rely on big spreads, long odds, or funky props. Stat Hero gives you the advantage, resulting in their gamers winning 4 times more often. Why? Because Stat Hero eliminates all of the fluff. It eliminates all the mystery about who or what you're going up against. But in addition to their pick'em games, they also have dozens of lineups you can comb through to take on head-to-head. All they do is post sets of players for you to take on with a set of players that you choose. Stat Hero is the easiest and fastest way to get your sports action fix. The simple, sleek gameplay will have you playing in minutes. This is what daily fantasy was truly meant to be. So I'm using Stat Hero this week to get me prepped for my bracket. Now, if there's one player that I'm going to choose in week 1 of March Madness, I'm going to go with Kennedy Chandler at Tennessee. Tennessee has a fairly easy first-round matchup against Longwood. I know that they're a 3-point shooting machine, but this Tennessee team has been on a heater in the postseason. Winning the SEC championship, Kennedy Chandler truly has emerged as one of the biggest leaders and one of the best scorers on this Tennessee team. So I'm going to rock with Kennedy Chandler, at least for the first week of the tournament. So sign up for free right now at stathero.com/lockedon and use promo code for LOCKEDON for a 100% deposit match. That's stathero.com/lockedon. Use promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% match. Stathero.com/lockedon, promo code LOCKEDON. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Make sure to check out Locked On Bracket Breakdown on March 14th right here on the Locked On LSU podcast feed and YouTube channel. College basketball experts Chris Gordy, Andy Patton, and betting expert Lee Sterling give you an in-depth breakdown on every matchup. Now, we learned on Saturday, Will Wade relieved of his duties as the head coach of the LSU men's basketball team. And it wasn't really, I don't think LSU really had much of a choice there because they were given the notice of allegations just about a week or so ago, and it highlighted some pretty damning evidence about Will Wade. Now, I did mention that there's not just the Will Wade side of this. This isn't just the LSU basketball side of things. There's also an LSU football side of things. The notice of allegations also highlighted some things that were going on in the LSU football team, and there are 3 instances of NCAA violations from the LSU football team that were outlined in this notice of allegations. Now, 1, these are all things I think we all already know exist, but the NCAA just kind of confined it in this notice of allegations. Number 1 being about $180,000 worth of embezzled funds from Our Lady of the Lake hospitals sent to the families of LSU football players. That came out that the father of an LSU recruit was being paid monthly by Our Lady of the Lake hospitals for work. He was being paid for years, even though he only worked at a couple events. So that came out in the NCAA violations. And also another level 2 violation for the incident after the national championship game, Odell Beckham Jr. handing out cash to players, 4 players earning $2,000 in cash from Odell Beckham Jr. after the national championship game. And also a level 3 violation from former head coach Ed Orgeron, who had, quote, impermissible contact with a recruit in January 2019 before that player completed his junior year. So recruiting violations, paying of players violations, a few things outlined here that could affect LSU football. Now, the good news here is that LSU football kind of saved its own ass. LSU cut 8 scholarship players over the next 2 years after that 2019 notice of allegations, reduced recruiting visits, and banned Odell Beckham Jr. from the facility for 2 years. Then LSU imposed a 1-year bowl ban on their team in 2020, kind of accepting the violations and saying, look, we're going to cooperate here. Also, the notice of allegations even mentioned that LSU reacted quickly to the discovery of the football violations, accepted responsibility, and implemented penalties that included disassociating from the representatives of its athletic interests. So, good news here for LSU football. Hey, we had these NCAA violations. They were going to crack down hard on LSU, and LSU says, hey, look, we'll cooperate. We'll do whatever we need to help us in the long run, to kind of save our own asses. That's the good thing. But the bad news here is LSU basketball and LSU football will be punished in conjunction with one another. LSU men's basketball and football infractions were sent jointly to this independent accountability resolution process, that little umbrella underneath the NCAA that deals with these kinds of violations. LSU appealed to the NCAA several times to say, hey, let's just settle these two instances separately. Let's keep football separate from basketball. I think knowing that basketball was pretty much effed and that football had done whatever it could to kind of save itself. So those are two entities that have been separate that will now be punished equally. And the bad news is, because even though LSU football was so receptive to this NCAA feedback and was so, on top of things when it came to making sure that they were crossing all of their T's and dotting all of their I's, Will Wade on the other end didn't. He wasn't really helping himself in the slightest. Now, he was suspended at the end of the 2019 season, and it wasn't because of all of this wiretap nonsense. It was because that he refused to meet with LSU and the NCAA officials regarding the reports of the FBI wiretap. Didn't even meet with the school, didn't even meet with the NCAA. And he has had a repeated habit of not complying with the NCAA's investigations. He didn't turn over phone records. He is said to have had, quote, knowingly provided false and misleading information to the NCAA enforcement staff and the complex case unit, per the notice of allegations. For 13 months, he didn't hand over any sort of records that were requested by the NCAA. And when he did ultimately turn over those records months after they were asked, he only provided less than half of those requests. He provided 60,000 and 130,000 of them were requested. He did not provide bank records related to the joint account that was used for the payments, especially the one to the fiance, which was allegedly coming from Will Wade's wife's account. So he did not provide those bank records. And it seemed like as long as he possibly could, he was ignoring the inevitable, trying to play it out as long as possible, didn't cooperate, basically just extending the inevitable of the hole that he dug himself in and all of the rules that he broke repeatedly and just continued to pile up on one another. So LSU football saying, hey, look, bowl ban, OBJ can't come to our facilities for 2 years. Don't knock us. And then Will Wade over here saying, hey, you only get half of the records requests that you asked from me months after you asked for them. So that's the bad thing about these two groups being in conjunction with one another, is that the way that both programs have handled things has been fairly different. Now, the thing here is the NCAA violations are seemingly impossible to predict. Like I said, they're gray. They don't approach things black and white. They don't say, okay, hey, Will Wade, you only turned over 60,000 of the 130,000 records that we asked. And that's, 1 year of a postseason ban. The NCAA doesn't work that way. So now what we're left to do is LSU can respond to the notice of allegations and send the NCAA, their due diligence. And then the NCAA and their complex case unit has 2 months to respond. And the two sides will then have a hearing with a panel, and that will ultimately be LSU's fate. Now, that fate cannot be vetoed. That fate cannot be challenged by LSU. Whatever that hearing decides as a result of the notice of allegations and as a result of LSU's response to those allegations, that will inevitably be LSU's fate. So that's really all we have to look for here. It's all we have to wait for. How will LSU respond? How will the NCAA respond? So not only will LSU basketball feel the repercussions of this notice of allegations, which, really highlight meat of it is against Will Wade, but LSU football also in question as well. Now, coming up next, we've, done some, I don't want to say digging on Will Wade because he did it all himself, but we've talked a good bit about the bad, about the unraveling of Will Wade and his tenure at LSU. But coming up next, I want to talk about the good, because the Will Wade era was damn fun. But before we do that, I want to tell y'all about BetOnline, because we've got plenty of games to bet on now that it is finally college basketball tournament time. And from all the latest odds, contests, and player props, betonline.net is your number one source for all sports betting needs and information. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. But it's not just basketball. Even though it is tournament time, BetOnline is your continued source for all sporting wagering information needs. They've got live betting, they've got your favorite Vegas casino games. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, Will Wade officially out as LSU basketball's head coach. What's next for this team? We'll get into that on tomorrow's podcast. What are some of the early names that have emerged to fill Will Wade's spot? What will happen as repercussions? What is LSU going to do in the postseason? They still got games to play. Coach Will Wade or not, they still got games to play. So we'll break down exactly what comes next for this team this season and seasons to come. We'll break that down on tomorrow's podcast. But looking forward tomorrow, tonight I want to look back because I remember what LSU basketball was like in the Johnny Jones era. And I'm sure that there are plenty of fans out there that remember kind of the dark days before that. You got your Dale Brown days, the golden age of LSU basketball. But there were some down times in there as well. And I go back to the Johnny Jones era, my freshman year in 2015-16, that 2015-16 season, the Ben Simmons season. At the number one overall draft pick on your team, and nobody cared about LSU basketball. The number one overall draft pick, number one recruit in college basketball, and you can't even make the NCAA tournament. Johnny Jones, it felt like he sucked the life out of that program. Nobody cared. I mean, it was more exciting to go to other sporting events on campus, some sporting events that traditionally at other schools, people wouldn't even bat an eye at, but people were way more willing to go to those events rather than men's basketball because it was so uninspiring and it wasn't a good product. And, Johnny Jones is a great guy at heart. Yes, 100%. But he didn't do anything for this program. And then Will Wade came along. It was energy. He got the people to buy in. He wanted to be at LSU. He wanted LSU to be a program that could compete for the NCAA tournament because that's what he believed in. That's what he thought this program could do. And it was almost instant. It felt like that once the Johnny Jones era turned over to the Will Wade era, people started going to games. People started caring about LSU basketball. LSU basketball was in the conversation for the SEC. Only a couple years after Will Wade came in, LSU wins the SEC regular season title. They were making runs for the tournament, something that under Johnny Jones, the NIT really felt like the ceiling. The Will Wade era at LSU was damn fun. And I know that you don't have to get one without the other. You don't have to have a coach that follows all the rules. And, you can also have a fun season. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You don't have to choose. But I had a really fun time when Will Wade was the head coach at LSU. He made people care about basketball again. He made LSU fans want to come to games and got the games rowdy and got people to buy in. And I always feel like LSU coaches have this certain sort of spunk about them. It's just a little bit different. You look at Paul Maneri. You look at Didi Bro. You look at Les Miles. You look at Ed Orgeron. Former coaches, at least. They all have a little bit of spunk about them. And ever since Will Wade's first day on campus, I always felt like he had that. He had that little bit of spunk, that little bit of spice, that little bit of a chip on his shoulder, that he didn't care what people said about him. Maybe to a fault. Don't mean to, put salt in the wound there. But Will Wade always had a sort of spunk about him and always had a certain admiration for the LSU program that made it really hard to not buy in. So now, moving forward, the Will Wade era is behind us. And we don't know what the fate for LSU basketball is going to be. It could be, some pretty rough years ahead of us. We don't know. It could be a slap on the wrist and it could be postseason bans for a few years. But whatever it is, I hope that LSU fans can at least find solace in the fact that people care about LSU basketball again. in the fact that LSU is competing for the SEC tournament, the fact that LSU is in the NCAA tournament. Will Wade really reminded us that LSU can be a basketball school. So if nothing less, at least we had that. So that's going to do it for me today. And like I said, coming up tomorrow, we are going to break down some early names who have emerged to fill the LSU men's basketball slot for next season, and also any more information that we may have about the program, about the notice of allegations, anything else that we have coming up, anything developing. We'll get into that, as well as what is this team doing in the NCAA tournament? What does this team look like moving forward without its head coach? We'll get into all of that. We'll break down Kevin Nickelberry, interim head coach, what he had to say about his plan moving forward into the NCAA tournament. We'll get into that. But I appreciate y'all for making Locked On LSU your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with insight and analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. I will see y'all tomorrow.